Today, we're going to talk to you about the dangers of buying a home in North Idaho.
Hey, if this is your first time to the channel, hit that subscribe button, tap the notifications bell so you can stay up to date on all of our latest content. And we put out a lot of content, to be honest. Be sure to check out our podcast as well on all audio platforms. If you do jump on there, please drop a review on there. That would be very helpful to us. Hey, our team, we get calls, texts, and emails every single day from people just like you trying to learn more about North Idaho, and we'd love to be your local resource. So if you're looking to make that move right now or 12 months from now, shoot us a call, text, email, whatever. Let's get that conversation started.
All right, guys, today we talked about dangers of buying a home. Truthfully, it's always dangerous buying a home, but there's certain things that are a little more specific to North Idaho, and we want to kind of key you in, especially as real estate agents, some of the things that we try to help mitigate to make sure that we're getting you the right information and we're protecting you from potential hazards, costly mistakes, and other things that could happen during a real estate transaction. The first one we want to highlight is mold. Mold is prevalent here in North Idaho. We have a lot of moisture, a lot of stuff that will sit through the winters. And there's a lot of things that we want to make sure that obviously mold is a health hazard for a lot of people. And we want to make sure that you're not buying something and then finding, tearing apart walls and finding moisture and finding stuff that could be lurking throughout your house. One of the biggest things that I noticed, and this is, in North Idaho, we don't have a lot of gable vents. If you look at a roof, typically a typical roof on the end will have a vent. I know Southern California has a lot of them, everything else. Idaho utilizes ridge vents a lot. Basically, it's a raised portion of the ridge that allows air to come in, and then there's soffits underneath that allow airflow. Without that good airflow, you have a tendency to let moisture build up, and then mold will end up being present on the wood structure and the underlayment on your roof. And obviously that can cause all sorts of issues. So one of the big things that I always look for is whether or not you actually have box vents in your roof outside. The reason for that is because a lot of times when we get heavy snow up here, I'd say probably half of the homes that people buy with me, when there is no box vents that are installed on the home and it's just a ridge vent, we find mold in the attic and have to have it treated before they move in.
Yeah, super common. You'll see it. Let me add this real quick. We will always recommend you to get a home inspection up here. It's super important because these are the times that you will find it. And then we have documentation that we can then use to go and negotiate with the sellers on getting these things mitigated. So you're gonna hear us say that a lot in today's video. It is extremely important. We have a great list of home inspectors when it comes time for that. So microbial growth, that's how they'll put it on the report, because unless they actually test it, then it's not confirmed to be mold. But if you see microbial growth, you can pretty much assume that it's mold. It's super common in crawl spaces and attics up here to varying degrees. We see it in, I don't know, at least half the homes that we sell, I would say. There's some level of it. Usually it's a very minor amount. It's very easy to mitigate. And there are professional companies up here that will mitigate it and provide a 1 to 5 year warranty. I think Eric is a guy that will do 5 years. So easy to deal with, but those are the places we're going to see it, and it's important to have that home inspector hit those crawl spaces and attics to find it. All right, next up, radon. If you're wondering what that is, it is a naturally occurring radioactive gas I think it comes off of granite or some decaying stone in the ground. It's all over up here. It's super common. If you Google it, you'll go down a rabbit hole and you'll be terrified that you're going to die the moment you set foot on North Idaho. It is all over the U.S. There's plenty of states that have it. It's definitely something to pay attention to. It is a real thing. Some people will tell you that it's not, but it is a real thing. It is testable. We always recommend when you get a home inspection, have the inspector test for radon as well. Then you will learn about things like picocuries. That's a real word. I do not know how to spell it, but radon, probably 50% of the homes up here that we have inspected, it comes up in those inspections as well, and often needs to be mitigated. It is not the end of the world. Easy to mitigate, not super expensive. I'd say on average, $2,000 to $2,200 for most normal size homes to put in a radon mitigation unit. And then it blows that gas from underneath the house, up the roof and out of the house. So it's no longer a danger.
Yep, super easy. And something that we always stress is that when you're buying a home, if there is an environment or some sort of hazard that the people that live there wouldn't continue to live there with, i.e. mold, radon, something that could be a health concern, we typically as agents push that back on the sellers to mitigate that, because even if they stayed there, they would not want to continue to live in a hazardous environment. So very important, especially whenever we do inspections, when we do an inspection response and we request repairs, these are the types of things that we try to mitigate before you get in your home.
Keep this in mind if you're freaking out about radon right now. North Idaho has higher or above average levels of radon as compared to the rest of the U.S., but we do not have higher levels of lung cancer. So keep that in mind. Don't freak out. It's solvable.
The next thing to consider when you're buying a home up here is hard water. You will notice that a lot of systems up here, especially well systems, will have soft water systems, water softeners, filters, and a lot of different things like that. Truth be told, if you were to pull up a map of the Spokane Prairie Aquifer, that is one of the largest underground aquifers in the U.S. and some of the cleanest, best water that we can provide. Like anything though, as things sit below ground, they do get they do get an abundance of minerals, such as calcium and things like that. So we will have some areas that have harder water. Where I previously lived, we won't talk about, I felt like there was harder water in that area. I would get like the crystals up on like my shower head, and I had to clean it constantly and put it in lime. I have not had to do that up here, and I do not have a water softening system. So, but it is really prevalent, especially for wells. And when it comes down to that, when you look at wells that are in certain areas, like a little bit south of the river, there is a tendency for a lot of those to carry a lot of heavy iron as well. So filtration systems and things like that are something to consider if you are on well water.
Yeah, once again, it's a thing that is very easy to mitigate, not super expensive to install one of those. So just keep it in the back of your mind. That is something you'll probably have to deal with. All right, one of the risks, dangers, things to be aware of in North Idaho is that many of these homes up here are on septic systems, especially if you're on acreage outside of town. All the cities, for the most part, are on sewer systems, but some of these that are not too far out, Dalton Gardens, for example, you're gonna be on septic systems. Nothing to be concerned about. Super common. The way it works is the liquids and solids from the house go into a septic tank, and then the liquids drain overflow into a leach field. Pretty common. You do need to get them pumped. I think they're recommending 5 to 7 years. Every time we have a transaction and we have the buyer, we always ask for the seller to pump the septic up here beforehand so that you're starting with a clean slate. Just something to be aware of, you know, and when they pump those out, they'll do a cursory inspection of them to ensure that the tank is in stable condition, and sometimes test the outflow on the leach fields as well.
Yeah, and if you do buy something on a septic system, if you're unfamiliar with them, you want to be really careful of the stuff that you put down there. You know, really putting a lot of paper waste, even a lot of food or things that you probably should avoid to just elongate the life of your system. But one thing that's really good, people ask up here like, oh, well, if I'm buying land and I'm going to put in a septic, does it perk well? Perking is basically testing how the water drains through the soil. Luckily in Idaho, and one of the reasons we have such a large aquifer, is this area is really, really good at absorbing fluids and absorbing those things. So that's why we don't have a lot of flash flooding and stuff like that. We have natural waterways, and we also have the ability to absorb. So most areas have really good perk tests. I really actually personally haven't come across anything that hasn't perked. I'm sure that exists. But something to keep in mind too, septics are very easy to put in this area.
Yeah, I've maybe come across a couple of where they had to have an engineered system, which can be quite a bit more costly. Honestly, I don't know exactly what that means, but it's something to do with the soil not perking and then having to do that. So that can be figured out beforehand by doing perk tests and whatnot. Also, sometimes some homes will have a lift tank. So the fluids will go down below the house, and then a pump system will pump it up to a leach field at a higher point, or a community septic system. So
very common for builds that are actually on mountains or basically on the sides coming up to the river. It doesn't perk well up there, so you will have those types of systems.
Yeah, and you know, if we're out showing you homes, those are things that we would point out. It's pretty easy to spot, okay, this home has a tank and then a lift system. Once again, I've had those in my own homes, nothing to worry about, just something to keep an eye on and make sure things are maintained well.
All right, the next thing to be cautious of when buying a house in North Idaho are wells. Now, wells are fantastic. A lot of people would prefer to be on a well. You own the water rights. You're able to draw just about as much water as you want. I think the only limitations are based off of the aquifer and the production, and I think it's somewhere around 10,000 gallons a day is what they don't want you. I've never had anybody actually get their meter tested or anything like that up here. However, when you're looking at a well, I would caution anybody in buying a property that does not already have a well. For a couple reasons. It's just inconvenient is number one. Okay, getting a well dug can take quite a while. It can take months. And the other big thing is the cost. Wells average around $100 per foot. So if you're 500 feet down, do the math, you're dealing with $50,000 to get yourself water. So if you can find land or a property that already has a high producing well that's already there, that is super good because you know that you're going to strike water, you know you have access to that, and our water levels don't vary as much. So be cautious because of time and obviously the money. The other thing too is if you're buying a house on a well, then two different things we're going to suggest. One is that you get a productivity test. This is actually going to validate and verify the actual flow rate of the well. If you are looking at something below 5 GPM, it may not be a financeable property if it does not have a cistern or some sort of holding tank. So that's really important. If you want to have a lawn or grazing or horses, you probably need something that's upwards of 10 to 15 GPM. But up here, I mean, I've seen wells 50, 60 GPM, really good producing wells depending on the area. So that's number one. And then the other thing to test for is obviously testing for any sort of bacteria, coliform, anything else like that. Basically a water quality test. There we go. And those we can usually get done in 2 to 3 days. So we'd highly encourage you to do those things just to protect your water and everything that you're going to have on the property.
I have not had any bad water up here yet, but it is something to, and I also had this happen recently with a VA loan where they actually required a water quality test. So it may come up, especially if you're using VA. I have seen a house up here that we had a productivity tested and it was 1/4 gallon per minute. Ooh. Yes, not ideal. They actually backed out of that deal because of it. So there are some areas here that are known for wells drying up. So it's important to reach out to us so we can kind of steer you in the right direction on that. We have a great aquifer, but as you get up into the foothills and the smaller mountains up here, the wells get very deep, and then occasionally over time, that productivity changes. So it's important to have that test done for sure. Another great resource, Idaho has a well log. There's an interactive map. I think it's Idaho well maps or welllogs.com. I'll drop the link in the
Google
note.
search. But
you can go on there and find a well on a specific property, click on it, and the well report will come up. Now, if it's older, I don't know what age that goes back to, but if it's an older well, it may not pop up on there. But all the newer wells will pop up on there, and you can see, all the wells in that area and see kind of an average of what the productivity is. That's a very useful tool. All right, next up, we get this question a lot. It is an important thing to pay attention to: risk of wildfire. Idaho is not immune to wildfires. Now, we have not recently had any of those giant raging fires that happen in other states like California, but it has happened in the last 100 years. A big fire like that. So it's possible. We do get smaller wildfires, and so it's something to pay attention to. Make sure you have defensible space around that property. You may run into the issue with an insurance company. I ran into this with my house. They will make sure you have defensible space, or they will not insure you. So you may be required to cut down some trees or some shrubbery near the home to make sure that it is safe from wildfires. But it is definitely a concern, especially as you head up into the foothills and the mountains. Down on the prairie, not so much. But if you have one of these view properties, there's a good chance you're going to be surrounded by a lot of timber, and that obviously can promote wildfires.
Yep, and I don't deal in absolutes. I don't think we should in anything, and I hate it when people deal in absolutes, but I will tell you, wildfire risk up here is much less. I've talked about this 500 times in different videos. Yeah. You have fuel-driven fires, topography-driven fires, and wind-driven fires. When you look at the California wildfires, Washington wildfires, Oregon, the ones that you see on the news that go forever, these are typically wind-driven fires. Our wind system up here is not like it is with the Santa Ana winds and everything else. We have the fuel and we have the topography, so be careful and be mindful on how you deal with the trees on your property and how close they are. However, the big conflagrations that you see in these other areas, we are just not as prone to those as other places. So cue the person that's like, there was a big fire 100 years ago.
Yes, we know.
Thank you.
We know.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I really wish you put your fire helmet on for that.
I would love to.
It would have been more real. So anyway, that it's important. Pay attention to it. Oh, insurance, wildfire insurance. So here's a great example. It's almost impossible to obtain in California right now, and if you do, it's probably $12,000 a year or more. We don't have that issue up here. So that's definitely a good indicator that wildfires are not as much of a risk. I'm not saying no risk, but not as much because homeowners insurance up here, for example, for me, I live on 12 acres. Ours is less than $2,000. Did I say 12 acres? I live on 5 acres. Ours is less than $2,000 a year for our homeowners insurance, right? We live in what they would call an enhanced wildfire zone up here. So it is not overly expensive as you will find in other states.
The next thing to consider when you're buying a home is the driveway. This is really important. This will make or break a sale many, many times.
Yep.
So recent example, just went and looked at a house. My clients loved it. It was fantastic. There was nothing that they would change except they had a steep driveway and it was on a north face. So a couple things to consider: how your driveway sits in the winter, how it receives sun, and how long is it? You own your driveway, so the responsibility to clear that driveway, keep it safe, make it accessible for you, your family, your kids, your friends, that is going to be on you. So if you have a 1/4 mile driveway, that's going to be on you to go and maintain that driveway 99% of the time. The other thing to consider is if your driveways are facing the north, they're going to receive very, very little sun, if any, in the winter. Well, you get just one day where it heats up enough to where that stuff kind of melts and then it turns to ice again. You're going to have an ice slick there. You have to maintain those driveways. Heated driveways are a thing up here. They're very expensive, not super common, but a lot of people, there are people up here that have them. Just be really mindful of how you're going to access your property. If you are up here during the beautiful months of April to September, October, you're not going to see what it's going to look like in the winter. So ask us, talk about those things. Make sure whatever agent you're working with, hopefully us, is going to be able to tell you, hey, this is stuff that you're going to have to think about. Okay, if you work and you travel and mom's at home and she's got to get the kids to school and you got a mile-long driveway and she doesn't know how to plow, that's going to be a problem.
If you have an agent and they're not telling you things like that, they're doing you a disservice and they're not being honest or they're clueless, because that is extremely important. We have crushed many a dream and had people thank us later because it's important, right? You get all googly-eyed over a property and then Dave or I come in there and we're like, hey, that driveway, you're going to need a plow and it's north facing and it's going to be a shit show. And we crushed that dream for you, but you later are like, hey, thanks, man. I didn't actually want to deal with all that. Or, whatever it is. Hey, that house, the siding is completely rotten. That's our job, to come out and point out all of the negative things so you have all of the information and kind of remove that emotion from the home buying process as much as we can so that you guys make a good decision. All right, next up, we get this question a lot as well. Pests. What kind of pests are we dealing with up here? Depending on where you're coming from, it may be strongly on your mind. If you're coming from California, you're going to be worried about termites. And I'm going to tell you that's not a thing up here. Don't worry about termites. But that is a very real thing in California, and I get it. I had termites in my house once.
Yeah,
terrible.
I've had termites.
Yep, not a thing. So I'm sure they're here on some level, but I've never seen one in a house or any indication of one. So I would not worry about that. Some things that you do need to worry about are rodents and bats. Bats are a big one up here. They are plaguing my in-laws' house. They have done everything they can to block off all access, but there is nonstop guano all over everything. It's nasty. Rodents, no more than anywhere else, but keep in mind in the wintertime, they want to find a cozy place to snuggle up, so they're going to sneak into your house, right? That's possible.
You know what's a neat thing for rodents too, and I found this out, is plant mint. If you plant mint around your house, rodents will come nowhere near your house. The mint has such a strong odor.
No kidding.
I've done this in our attic before with mint oil, and they just evacuate. They cannot handle the odor of mint. If you plant that around the edges of your house, they will not come around it.
Another thing you can do is put chickens in your house because they'll murder them all.
There you go.
Very weird.
In your house?
I mean, you could.
What kind of hick are you?
I'm not. I don't have chickens in my house.
Chickens in your house. Anyway.
I did find some mice in the barn the other day. So if you've got animals and you're outside, right? I've got a chicken coop. I've got goats. You're going to have them out there. That's a good place to get a barn cat. And you'll have a very happy cat and no mice.
Yeah. The other thing is wasps and yellow jackets. Those are a thing up here.
Oh, my goodness.
I have had black hornets. I've had a lot of wasps, a lot of yellow jackets in my yard. You'll see those little green things hanging around.
Yep.
The funny thing is I have not been stung once since I've been up here. If flying insects, that's really the only one that concerns me. We do have mosquitoes. There's water up here. But another thing that I've hardly ever been stung is by a mosquito, unless I went up to Priest Lake and I was camping.
Yeah.
Then I got eaten alive. That was terrible.
There's not a lot. We don't have
Nope.
black flies. There are those little tiny no-see-ums that you get on the lake occasionally. Have you seen those? And
Oh,
they
yeah.
bite really hard. I think they're called no-see-ums. So there are some things. But if we're talking about houses, wasps and yellow jackets. Last year was a very bad year. Do you call them meat bees or yellow jackets?
I've never, whatever you just said.
Have you ever heard meat bees?
No.
I think it's my wife has always called them that.
Meat
they're
bees?
the same thing. So if you're out there and you're like, oh, no, they're the same thing. Trust me. They're a pain in the ass. I killed thousands of them last year. That was heartless. I take that back. But something to keep in mind. And, people ask, is there pest inspections up here? We don't. I've never done one on the purchase of a home, a pest inspection, but the home inspectors will look for obvious signs of the common pests that you would find in a house up here.
And if you do find stuff, you're finding guano or you're finding, something dug out, like you think there might be raccoons, we do have a pest guy up here that will actually come out and tell you about those things. He's excellent at it. He traps all the time, raccoons, beavers, otters. He does all sorts of stuff like that.
I can't see otters being a problem.
Yeah, well, on those waterfront homes, on their docks and
They're
stuff like that.
cute.
Anyways,
Love those things.
so yeah, if you do see signs of pests, we do have somebody that can come out and take a look at that as well. Panhandle critter getter.
I love it. Yeah.
All right. The 9th thing that you should be cautious of is building codes or the lack of building codes. Look, Idaho can be a little bit of a throwback, okay? Where there's a lot of regulations in a lot of places in the US, there's not as many regulations up here. So you will find some lax building codes. Now, I know a lot of locals will tell you, man, the building codes are out of control. And I understand where they're coming from because they've watched the change and they've watched new things be implemented. But if you're coming from a very liberal state that has a lot of building codes and a lot of red tape, we don't. And so much so that you need to be careful when you're going to counties like Bonner County, Benno County, Boundary County, all the way up towards Canada. There can definitely be very minimal codes, and thus, when you're buying a house and doing an inspection, things may not be to code, and they may have been done by a very interesting...
You just don't know.
I don't know.
You just don't know.
Just be careful.
You're tossing the dice a little bit, and I have seen some sketchy homes up in Bonner County. That is why it's important to get a home inspector, like I said, because they're going to come out and be like, yeah, bro, that's not structurally sound. Because there are no structural code requirements in some of these counties, like Bonner County, for example. I think the only thing in Bonner County that you have to get a permit for is electrical and septic. So keep that in mind. I'm not saying there aren't some great home builders building up there and you don't have to worry about it. I'm just saying, these are things you got to pay attention to.
So and the big thing too, when you hear the words like it doesn't meet code, it's not up to code, really what it comes down to is you doing your due diligence. We will help you with this to get people out there that are professionals in those trades to at least advise you of what is the risk. If you're going to take on a home, there's a lot of beautiful homes up here, a lot of great places that aren't to code. You need to understand why they're not to code, and is that a risk for you, and understand what risk you are taking on and what the advantage is. So it doesn't mean that it should be a deal killer for you, but it does mean that you should do some further investigation.
Yep. I remember one home in particular I showed to a client, and I like to get in the crawl space and kind of look around if I can. And we got in the crawl space. This house was on a hill. The entire thing was built on posts and piers, and it was just those concrete piers you buy at Home Depot and then 6x6 posts going to the floor joists. And it was obviously shifting. So that was like hard no. I was like, dude, look at this. I would run away from this house. And he did, thankfully. But those are the kind of things you don't know. Often it's very obvious if you have any kind of knowledge in construction before you even need a home inspector to kind of take a look at something and be like, I would not buy that personally.
Okay. And finally, our final tips, just to reiterate things that you should do if you're buying a home to mitigate the dangers of buying a home in Idaho. First, get inspections. We're talking about a full home inspection. Consider a radon inspection, consider a well productivity test, a well water quality test. Consider those things to make sure that you are getting what you think you're getting and that it's in good condition. Once again, we never really work in absolutes. When there's a problem, we help you solve it or at least look at the options to mitigate the issue. And then if it works for you, then move forward. And if it doesn't, we're here to protect you to get out of that situation so you don't have some sort of issue or some costly disaster down the road. The other thing too, number 2, is research insurance costs. We have a lot of good insurance agents up here, people we'd love to recommend to you to let you know that have done a great job for clients of ours in the past that have mitigated wildland issue or wildfire issues, septic issues, permit issues, a lot of those different things that people think might be a deal killer. they're able to insure those things or at least give you a rate that would be competitive to somebody else.
Couple other tips. Budgeting for long-term maintenance issues, always a good idea. You know, things like wells, septics, they need maintenance. It's not super cheap to pump out your septic. Granted, you only have to do it every 5 to 7 years, but it's going to be $600 for on average to change that out. If you have to replace the pump in your well, it could be $10,000 to have that done. So it's important to kind of budget those things out depending on how that home is situated. Also, if buying in one of these counties with lax building codes or no building codes, it is very important to get that home inspection. Come with one of us. We will put our eyes on it. We see a lot of homes up here. We do a lot of transactions, so we're very familiar with the process, and we will give you our opinion. We will always give you our honest opinion. I would rather have you walk away from a home at the beginning than sell you a house that you realize a year later is a giant pile of crap. That's extremely important to us. So you will always get the honest answer out of us, even if we have to eat it ourselves sometimes. That's just the way it is. So get an inspection, get an inspection, get an inspection. If you have an agent anywhere you are and they tell you not to, hey, this deal's gonna be a lot more strong if we waive the inspection, they're shady. Don't do that. We will never tell you to do that.
Do not waive your inspection.
Never.
We even encourage, even when we sell homes, even when it's our listing, if an agent comes to us with a buyer and says they're going to waive inspection, we still try to encourage them to get an inspection. It reduces liability on both the sellers and the buyers and the agents and the brokerages, and it makes sure that everything is brought out into the open. So don't pass that up.
One more thing is to consider a home warranty. We always try to negotiate, when we have the buyers, a home warranty that the seller pays for. They provide a lot of value to fix smaller things that may come up in that first year of home ownership, appliances, things like that, water leaks. So they can be very valuable, and we will always try to negotiate that in for you.
And if you're not a new home buyer or they don't give you a home warranty, we got you covered.
Yep. All right, thank you guys. Hopefully you found this video informative. If you have further questions, we are easy to get a hold of. Shoot us an email, text, or call. We would love to represent you on this side of things. And hopefully we kind of demonstrated that we do have a good time, but we also have pretty good knowledge in this area, and we got you covered.